Hello everyone, my name is Alphonsus and I've been a photojournalist with the Straits Times for the last 10 years. I'm also the director of the evening choir at the Cathedral of the Good Shepherd. On this occasion of the 54th World Communications Day, I will be sharing a little bit with you about telling stories through photographs. As Pope Francis said in his message, human beings are storytellers. From childhood, we hunger for stories just as we hunger for food. Stories influence our lives, whether in the form of fairy tales, novels, films, songs, news, even if we do not always realize it. So in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to show you a collection of photographs which I've made over the last 10 years. And I will share with you a little about how, as photographers for the church, you can make change happen, you can make a difference through your pictures. Pictures tell stories. What kind of stories can you tell with pictures? A lot of information can be compressed into one photo. Some pictures are very interesting, some are humorous. I was walking around in Chinatown one day, about 10 years ago, when I saw this happen before my very eyes. So what did I do? The first thing I did was to take a picture. So if you look here, you will see this lady struggling with a very big orange. Actually, the backstory is that the wind blew the Chinese New Year display across the road and the orange was blocking the bus. So this lady was trying to remove it and it made for a really interesting picture. So everything you see in this picture actually tells a story. Look at this. I came out from Sunday Mass one morning and I crossed the road and I saw this happen. A car had misjudged a turn and crashed into the pillar of chimes. So the roof fell in on the car. Fortunately, the family that was in the car, you can see them sitting here, they were uninjured, but this damage took about half a year for them to repair. So a lot of information, a lot of story is compressed into this one picture. Pictures also transmit emotions. See the excitement and the joy on the faces of these workers when they had just completed the Circle Line tunneling. Now, you know that was a very big, expensive and difficult project. So the fact that it was completed was a very happy occasion for all these people involved, especially the workers on the ground. Now, there are many kinds of emotions that you can depict with pictures. Joy is one of them. Sadness is obviously another one of them. In this picture, you see a family grieving because they just lost their son in an accident. I happened to be there at the cemetery when the burial took place. So pictures record all these emotions and you are able to relive them by looking at the pictures. Pictures also show beauty. It's a very simple picture, something that I saw while driving past a construction site. There was a crane there was a full moon. All I needed to do was to get out of the car, walk around a little bit, and find the perfect angle to line them up. And I managed to produce this very quiet, very still, but beautiful picture. Pictures, most importantly, record history. We are the ones who are there seeing things happening, but the people who come after us will never have a chance to know all this if we didn't take that picture. One of the places I used to frequent when I was younger was the train station at Bukit Timah Road. And I'd love to go there in the evenings and watch this ritual happening where the station master would pass a token in this leather bag to the incoming train driver. And it was a very well choreographed thing, something that you would not know about or witness if you'd never seen it happen yourself. Now that the train station is no longer operational, the trains don't go by anymore, and this system is really old, so not many places in the world have it. People who came after us would not have a chance to see this happening. And so this picture actually immortalizes this ritual, this act, this moment. so that we can remember that it actually happened in Singapore many years ago. Now, I was there for the funeral procession of the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and this picture that I took is forever immortalized on one of the covers of the Straits Times. So this is another great moment in history where you see all of Singapore turn out to send off its founding father. It was a fantastic moment with the crowd, with the rain, with the procession, the uniforms, the somber colors. And this picture records it for all history. Now, we always say a picture paints 1,000 words. Think about this statement and look at this particular famous picture, which I saw when I visited Paris. Look at all the detail in that picture, the expressions of whoever's faces you can see, the actions that people are doing, everything is focused around that picture, that painting in the center. You could look at this picture for quite a few minutes and really spot a lot of things that are happening in it. Now, one of the things I used to enjoy doing working at the newspaper is adventure photography, particularly with the military. I like covering special forces. And one of the opportunities that I had was to fly with the Black Knights during the training for one of the National Day performances. Although I do write some text, you can see the text in the left side, you will notice that the things that really draw people into the page are the pictures, not the words. So the first thing that people will notice when they look at the screen or at the paper, at a magazine, are the pictures. And that's why your pictures are very powerful, because they will command the attention of the viewer first. And after that, the person will read the headline, he will go into the text, he will read more of the background of the story. But the pictures will grab your attention first and foremost. So your pictures can be agents of change, because pictures are very powerful messengers. A lot of information is contained in there. How you angle the picture tells the story that you want to put across to your viewer. So if you are working for the church, if you are a photographer trying to get something done, your picture has the potential to launch initiatives, social causes, by highlighting things that need to be done. So there are a lot of photographers who sell their pictures on the market for a lot of money, and that's how they make a good living. But if you are working towards a mission, your pictures can also be worth money in the sense that you can raise funds for a cause, and your pictures could possibly change lives, perhaps millions of lives, because there are some pictures that tell stories that influence, that shape how things are changed, how things move, how societies are shaped. And it can all come down to just one picture. So what do you do with your camera? As a photographer, you use shapes, colors, forms, light, and the whole thing, we call it beauty, in order to witness to God's creation, because that is why we take pictures. Now, some people enjoy photography as a hobby, and it's a very worthwhile and interesting hobby, of course. But more importantly is what you do with your skill as a photographer to use it for a greater purpose, to tell stories, to act as a witness to what God has created, to what He has done, and to show to everyone His gifts to mankind. Because not everybody notices the things that He has created until they have been immortalized in a picture. So this was a picture I made when I was in Iceland. I was driving around one evening and I saw the lights. So I quickly looked for a place that had a pretty decent background, and it was freezing cold, but I just had to get out of the car and make this picture. So I spent maybe about an hour there, but it was heavenly because there were all these stars, there were all these mountains, and there were the lights just dancing around. Now, with the naked eye, I could not really see all these things except for the lights. But because I could use a long exposure on the camera, all this was apparent later when I looked at the pictures on my computer. Another example would be at this lake where we had some icebergs floating around. Look at the scale of how big these icebergs are compared with how small the people are in the background. Look at the shapes, the colors, the contours, how otherworldly this whole scene looks. To me, this picture is a testament to the power of God's creation. Now, there are stories everywhere. Often I hear, people saying that Singapore is so small. What kind of stories can I tell? We've seen almost everything, or we think we've seen almost everything. But the fact is that if you take the time to talk to people, to sit there and just observe things that are happening, to go into detail, you will find that there are very many interesting small stories all over the place. In your home, perhaps your sibling or your mom is a volunteer somewhere where she or he does something very interesting, something meaningful. This could be a very interesting snippet of a story for maybe the Catholic news, for your local newsletter, for your parish bulletin, for your website, something that might inspire other people to look deeper into what your mom or your brother or someone at home is doing to help someone else in society. In schools, there are plenty of stories happening there. In the clubs, in the societies, in the classrooms, maybe a teacher is helping some student who is disadvantaged. Maybe a student is helping another student who has problems at home. These are all very interesting stories that could possibly be found. You just need to meet the right person and trust that God will lead you to meet the right person when you're doing this kind of work. In your workplace, and especially in your parishes, because there are so many ministries that you could possibly feature. If your parish alone had 20 or 30 groups, that would occupy your bulletin for the next few years, just featuring every single one of them, what they are doing, how they are reaching out, the activities, the people involved. It's all so interesting. So one of the things that I like to feature in my work at the Straits Times is whenever I hear about a church that's undergoing a project. Now, I love architecture. I like things of beauty. So I always wait for an opportunity when a church is undergoing a kind of renovation to get in on the story and make the pictures. So this was a couple of years ago when the new Novena church was being built. And there was this guy with his mobile studio producing the new stained glass for the church. So my colleague went and talked to him, and I went down and I looked around, asked some questions, and made some pictures. So we put this story on the home cover. In a way, this is my way of witnessing to the rest of society, to Singapore, to readers, that hey, this is what's happening in the Catholic world. We have a new church that's coming up. There are going to be things of great beauty in there that people can look at, admire, meditate on, using God's gifts to create objects of beauty for other people to use, to pray, to meditate, to reflect. And then St. Peter and Paul's underwent its own restoration. So I went there and I took some pictures of the stained glass, the restored pews, doors, staircases, tiles, and everything. So we had a whole page on this as well. And then it was the turn of the cathedral itself to undergo its restoration. You know, you wouldn't have guessed it, but because of a very small incident where a column or two collapsed, they discovered that there was actually a time capsule under the place where this collapse happened. So because I was a part of the community, I had first-hand information about this, and I said, hey, this is a really great story. So me and my colleague got in on it, and we got to see the collapsed column. We got to touch the place where the original stone was laid, where hands had never been. We found all these very interesting old 100-plus-year-old artifacts that were buried under the column. And so we got the story in the newspaper as well, so everyone could read about it and share in our astonishment at the amazing artifacts that had been preserved from over 100 years ago. And then finally, the new Novena Church was built. So of course, being a fan of this kind of architecture, I went there and I spent one whole afternoon making pictures of the stained glass, of the new furniture that it had, the sanctuary lamp, the Gothic columns, the statues and everything. So one of the things that we do as photographers is to bring people to places they cannot go to. Because, you know, people are busy with their own lives, they're going about doing their own things. They don't go poking, you know, their heads into all these little niche places that only we know about. So what do is we go there and we get the pictures, show them to people, and tell people that these places and things actually exist, that they would otherwise not have known about. Show people things that they cannot see, things that only you have access to because you are part of the parish. You know what's happening behind the scenes. You know all the interesting stories and all the interesting people that form part of your community that you think it's worth more people knowing about, reading and seeing. Telling people what they do not know, because you have access to all this privileged information. Things that are happening that only you know, that you think are worth sharing with other people. So one of the things that we uncovered, well, not really uncovered because they were there all along, but people had never actually had a chance to see them, for all these treasures that were accumulated at the cathedral over 100+ years of service. We had all these old chalices, we had artifacts from past bishops, we even had relics of saints wrapped up in paper, kept in a box. We had all these statues, these marvelous relics and monstrances and all that. So again, I spent another day there taking a lot of very nice pictures of these things because, you know, really all these objects, they are man-made, but they are man's testament to the magnificence and the glory of God. And that is really the reason why people spend so long, so much effort to create all these things, because really only the best is reserved for our Creator. And if we didn't make these pictures, if we didn't put them in the newspaper, if we didn't write a story about them, nobody would see them, nobody would hear about them, and nobody would know they even existed. And then there wouldn't be very much use having all these things because nobody would know about them. So I wrote this little article, made these pictures, and then Javon, our head altar server, put all these things in the Cathedral Heritage Center. So now everybody who comes by can enjoy them because there's no point keeping them locked away when nobody can see them. So as a photographer, you would find treasures like these in your own parishes, and there are plenty of them, especially in the older churches. Go look in the storerooms, ask your parish priest, talk to the older parishioners, because I bet you a lot of them have stuff like that kept at home or in the parish storerooms or somewhere inside the church. You just need to find it. Being part of the cathedral community, I actually had access to some of this, so I took some nice pictures and got it ready for the article that announced that the cathedral restoration was complete. So now all of Singapore, all the readers can see how beautiful the newly restored church looked. And this took quite a number of days to photograph, but I think it was all very educational for me. Getting all the caption information was very interesting because I learned a lot more about the church that I was serving in. So one of the things that I was really satisfied with is, as a newspaper photographer, I managed to tell more people about the Catholic faith, about our buildings and heritage. And in a way, this was my way of witnessing to our faith, to the wider world. So one of the things that you can do as a photographer that I was talking about previously to inspire change is to highlight social injustices, things that you think can be improved, things that are not satisfactory, people who need help, who are not getting the help they need, things that can be changed to make society a better place. And all this can be brought about through pictures that are carefully taken, carefully angled, well published and written about. And it's not just the bad things, but also the good things, because our stories, as Pope Francis says, must uplift others. So you tell of the inspiring examples that you come across in your daily lives, people who are doing good work, people who are doing work that more people should know about. So what happens when they know about this is that they can help through donations, through themselves volunteering, by connecting them with other people who can help this particular cause, by networking. Basically, what you're doing as a photographer is to broadcast what you think is a good example that people should follow, that people should add on to. So you have two things that you can do. Pictures are also a witness to faith. And one of these witnesses to faith that I recently saw was at the 165th anniversary of the IJ sisters in Singapore. And it was tremendous because there were thousands of all these IJ students and alumni. And what really got my attention were all these IJ sisters, many of them who were already quite elderly, and they were all so caught up in the atmosphere of the celebration that you would think that they were much younger in the way that they were so excitedly singing and shouting and laughing and holding hands and dancing. And this picture was published in the Straits Times, and it was a great way for us, for me, to witness to the Catholic faith that has been in Singapore for such a long time, has educated so many people, so many students, and who has done so much good for our society at large. So this was definitely a tremendous way to witness to the faith through a picture and several other pictures that were published. Now, another picture that I made quite recently as a witness to faith was a little more quiet, a little smaller group. And this is a small part of the evening choir that gathered to produce music for our online masses, right up to the moment where we were not allowed to do this anymore because it was deemed too unsafe to gather in groups. So you can see them here in the middle of the night in a quiet church with nobody else around, wearing their face masks and having a rehearsal before doing the actual recording. Now, this is a really unusual picture because you've never seen anything like this happen in your lifetime, and you might probably never see anything like this happen again. We definitely do not see choirs all dressed up, wearing face masks, because people don't sing with face masks on, but we had to because of the necessity of the situation. So in a way, this is definitely a historical picture and one that would be looked back on with quite interesting memories of what happened in 2020. So again, a witness to faith, because these people definitely had the faith together to do the duty that they had to do, despite all the inconveniences, despite the late hours, despite uh, all the tremendous sacrifices they had to put in above their day jobs. As photographers, we have to be effective messengers of truth and faith, because that is really the bottom line of our ministry as photographers for our parishes, for our churches. And in order to do this, there are three things that we have to be willing to do. The first is we have, of course, to be willing. It's all very hard work. So even though photography may be a hobby, but doing this as a ministry, as a cause, might not be so easy for some. So not everyone is willing. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, are you a willing photographer for a greater cause? Second, you need to be able. Now, you might be willing. I want to be a photographer, but are you able? Do you have the skills to do this? And if you don't have the skills, are you willing to acquire these skills, to go for some, basic courses, to practice on your own, to make sure that your pictures are actually inspiring to the people who look at them? Because you can take pictures, but the pictures must speak to the audience. And in order to do that, you actually need to practice, you need experience, you will need to invest time, money, effort to do this in order to become able. Are you ready? And I like to say this, when the button is pressed, when you are called upon to do something. So all these three prerequisites have to be fulfilled in order for you to be an effective witness to the faith through your pictures, to tell the stories that need to be told. Now, for myself, a personal story was, I'm definitely willing. I'm always happy to help wherever possible. Able, I would say that I'm able because of the training that I've had in my job. And the question is, was I ready? So, came Palm Sunday this year, and very few people were actually allowed in the church because of the social distancing measures that the government had put in place. So the Archbishop's office asked me and said, can you photograph the Mass? And I said, wow, that's going to be quite a task, because my other job was actually to play the music on cue during the Mass, the pre-recorded music, because there was no choir. So it was going to be quite an interesting challenge to try and take pictures of the Mass and still be ready to play the music when it had to be played. So I took a deep breath and I said, yes, I will do it. Because number one, you couldn't get a photographer into church. It wasn't allowed. And number two, I had the skills and I had the equipment. So if I don't do it, nobody else would do it. And all these moments would be lost to history. There will be no witness to this particular time in history. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I brought my gear down. I dressed up for the occasion, got my music, plugged in my laptop, and I'm going to share with you some pictures that I made of the most empty church that we've ever seen in recent history during a Mass. So this was a picture that I made just before the entrance procession started. Javon was carrying the thurible, the incense was already smoking, and it was literally minutes before the live stream went live. So, the people in charge of the live stream were getting a bit nervous. They were like, Elf, it's starting. You can't be taking pictures now. I said, okay, don't worry. I know. I'm counting down in my head as well. 45 seconds to go. I made a picture of the procession lined up, ready to walk down the nave to the altar. You can see the bishop there with the cross bearer, with the thurifer, and I had just 45 seconds to get up to the choir loft and play the processional hymn for this to happen. And then from upstairs in the choir loft, I took some more pictures of just these three people walking down the nave while All Glory, Lord and Honor was playing in the background. So it was a really surreal moment because there was nobody in church. There were just 3 people, 2 altar servers and the bishop, and no choir, but just pre-recorded music. And there I was taking pictures of this thing happening. So later on during the Mass, during the segments where no music was required, I got my gear, I ran downstairs, and I started making as many pictures as I could of this whole Mass, because I knew that I might never have a chance to do this again. As measures were increasingly tightened, fewer and fewer people were allowed in the church, and I figured I might not even be allowed in myself, which actually happened. So I was quite glad that I made the most of Palm Sunday, because this was the only Mass that I could photograph to show the rest of the people what actually happened there that day. And then here is a picture of what it looked like when Bishop was delivering his sermon to the camera. Very few people were actually present there. The whole place was empty. It was just Bishop and all these cameras lined up in front of him. A sight that you probably would never see again in this lifetime. Well, we hope. And this is the moment where the consecration is happening, and you can see Bishop all by himself with just a couple of readers sitting in the pews and the entire church empty. This is, I think for me, the defining moment where you see the miracle being performed and nobody physically present in the church. It's a most unusual sight, and actually a very poignant one for me as well. So while this was happening, I actually witnessed this act of faith that was happening outside the church. As expected, there were a couple of people in the church grounds, and they knew, these people knew that they wanted to be as close to the Mass as possible, even though they could not enter the church. And this wasn't possible later on for the other Masses because the gates of the church were locked. So this lady was here praying. You can see the reverence, the piety, the faith in her expression right outside the windows of the church. Personally, I was very moved when I saw this picture, so I just took as many pictures of her as I could while she was near the window with her eyes closed. To me, this is really an act of faith. So the Mass came to an end, and you can see Bishop coming down the center of the nave as he is walking out, pretty much all by himself because the altar servers are in front of him and out of view of the camera. So again, this is another very poignant picture of the last, or one of the last Masses that we had in the cathedral before it was closed entirely for this season. And I was quite glad that I was there and that I said yes to the opportunity to make these pictures, because now I can share them with all of you. And hopefully after this season is over, we can share them with more people, and we can look back at this period and remember what it was like during this period where we had no more actual physical Masses in the church. So this is my latest story that I have to share with you during this season of COVID-19 as a photographer. And I hope that all of you would be inspired to go out and make your own stories through your pictures in your own homes, schools, workplaces, and parishes. Thank you for joining me here for this presentation, and I wish you all the very best.
Wow, so inspiring. Yeah. Have not seen those pictures of the empty church, and yeah, I've taken pictures in that church many times, and you have given me another perspective of how it's like. Yeah, and some of you actually sent me some private messages in the chat saying that it's interesting how Elf keeps saying making pictures instead of taking pictures. Yeah, and history is in the making. Yeah, his story is in the making as well. So wow, my hair stand when I saw some pictures. anyway, so you guys can go in and type in your questions, and in a group chat, myself, Archcom team will look at some questions and we'll answer. One of the few questions that have been coming up especially when he was showing the Northern Lights, what kind of camera, what kind of gear is he using. If I'm not wrong, and if I remember correctly, and from what I remember, all right, they uses Nikon system. Yeah, they uses Nikon system. So SPH, the photographers, they use a Nikon system, including people from Mika. Are they still called Mika? I think so. They're called Mika. Yeah. Yeah. So they use the same system, and they don't use their own camera. So in the event where there is big events like F1 and all that, when they need to go down and do coverage, Nikon will support them with the long lenses. Yeah. So those long lenses are actually from Nikon, not in SPH itself. So these are some technical questions that some of you are asking me privately. So okay. Then all right, so I'll just share a few pictures with everyone as well. All right, on what are the my collaboration with Archcom. Myself, I don't work for Archcom for a long time. I've been uh volunteer with them, and over time we have become good friends with one another. So in these few years, I learned about needing to collaborate with people from different department. So Vita, which stands for volunteer in the Archdiocese. Okay, we have got Vita Images, so we take photos. We have got Vita Studios, they do the video, and we have got Vita Spirit, which they will help us to pray. They will teach us, or they will pray with us. We also have got Vita Scribes, Vita Social Media, so on and so forth. And in these pictures that I'm going to share with you, I'm going to share with you on how I collaborated with Vita Social Media and Office, how we produce that picture in a very tight time frame. Yeah. So Mark, you can show that slide. Yep. So the first picture that you've seen was what was told to me. Okay. Office told me, Paul, we need to get this shot. We need to get Archbishop raising the body of Christ, and this picture need to be shot on, if I'm not wrong, it's Palm Sunday, or I cannot remember which day, but I remember the timeline was very, very short. And they said they want it in black and white. Okay, I said, okay, what is the words that's going to go along with it? And I actually communicated with them, knowing that I need to give them a headroom so that they are able to input some text. So that was behind the scene, did a bit of editing to bring Jesus out, to bring Archbishop out, to give a bit of depth of field. And with that picture, they said that, oh, they need it in black and white. Yeah. So that for whatever reason that they told me. And the final result is this shot. And this picture went out on social media. Yeah. It wasn't an easy shot to take, because we need to give high res. That's number one. Number two, the instruction to me is I need to see Jesus. I need to see Bishop's face. I need to see Bishop's eyes. And when Bishop raises the body of Christ, we need to get that shot. Yeah. So communication is much needed. Many of us, we are in church. We go into church and we just say, okay, let's get a shot. Let's be trigger happy, and get what we want. Very often we've forgotten to ask the person that is going to do the posting on social media, what is the story that we are going to tell? In this case, it is a quote from St. Augustine, and I worked closely with them, and we got this picture out, and this was pushed out within a few hours after Mass, before the sunrise. Yeah. All right. So this is one shot. Let's move on to the next picture, Mark. All right. So many of us was asking me what kind of gear I was using, or no, Alf was using, and this picture taken by me was taken from um, Church of Saint Anthony. So Church of Saint Anthony recently went through some renovation, and and when the new crucifix need to be hooked up, Jesus is heavy, the cross is an old cross, super heavy, and the alignment need to be right. And when that was going up, I wasn't the photographer then, but when I saw this moment, I whip out my phone, I took a snapshot of it. So it speaks a lot. And after I took this picture, I asked myself, what would be a good scripture text to go along? And so this is the scripture text that I thought that it would be nice. Yeah. So just now, Alf did speak about you must be willing, and are you ready? Do you have what it takes? Gears, our system that we have is important. Are we able to go long range? Are we able to go up close? But at the end of it is maybe sometimes we need to pause for a while to find the right angle and wait for the moment. Yeah. For this moment that everybody is looking up, that is the moment. And none of them were looking down. Yeah, everybody was looking at Jesus to get Jesus at the right place.